Yeah, I think this was a pretty fair chapter. I wish it was more hype considering it was right after a long break, but it wasn't set up to be one of those big hype chapters. It was more designed to be like pretty much a follow back up to a skirmish that's going on. I also found some more stuff on the people that they were fighting, like these enemies. I already forgot what they were called, but they're the Dark Talismans. There we go. I was like trying to remember. I'm like, I know their name isn't too crazy, but they're set up to be decent opponents. I think that they're designed way more to get a feel of threat rather than these guys themselves being that big of a threat. Because the first guy had trickiness to him, but clearly with Nazians and Percival being out, he was effective. These two, clearly more so, but I think that at least this first one, what's her name, Bergie, how her name is pronounced, she definitely had a bad opponent. She probably would have actually done fine if she switched and fought Donnie. Like, Donnie's, like, saying in this one, he's like, there's, like, a funny part where he's being like, oh, I would like to fight the smaller opponent, and Anne's obviously, instead of one of those fights, obviously, Annie's the girl fighting the girl character, and Donnie, though he is the old, he's the biggest guy to the main cast, him to fight the biggest guy out of the enemy opponents, in terms of size, definitely isn't good for him, because as a fighter, he is obviously the weakest out of them. Even though Annie doesn't have any offensive magic, I mean, I would assume that unless she just gets completely incapacitated by being floated in the air, that she would be able to beat him without that much difficulty. But the part that was weird for me, not like weird if it makes sense, is Sin knows about these guys, and he like knows their names, even knows their titles, and Burge is even saying like only a few people in Camelot would even be aware of them. And that obviously is like opening more questions for who Sin is. I mean, it's a year plus into the series. I don't think we really need to bring up more of like the who the hell is Sin kind of questioning, but obviously it's something that you have to at least nod at. The fact that it is in this chapter. There's another question of like, how does Sin know this? I feel like Sin has to be somebody important. If he's not one of the other four knights, he has to be some character that has a story importance that is going to make sense of all this. Like, if he is some old sage that he's like, oh, I've been waiting for the four knights and I knew I'd come out. But I guess he can't be that old because of the whole thing with Ard. So we'll see. I know a lot of people think he's Lancelot, and I feel like that, at least as of right now, is the most likely thing. Apparently he's met the Fairy King, but he referred to him as the Fairy King. He didn't go too much about him. The Bonsal thing about being related to the fox. There's a lot of sense to be made there for Lancelot, but we'll just have to wait a minute to really kind of figure out. I'm wondering though, like, I figured for this next fight, because I'll talk about stuff in this chapter, but I'm way more intrigued with the Donnie fight. I'm way more intrigued with how Donnie's gonna defeat his opponent, because like Annie seems mostly fine. She doesn't seem that hurt from the end of her fight. She seems a little bit damaged, but not at a point where I don't think she'd be able to keep fighting. So is she going to help Donnie, or is Donnie going to be on his own? And I would like to believe that based off of the fight that Nazian's got, the fight that Annie got, like, Nazian's got a new ability kind of on display. And Annie got a new showing of how her power works in a scenario like this. I mean, I guess she counters clones. And I guess illusions. Like, she would, like, unless you had something that completely messed with her ability to, like, see the truth and stuff, I imagine, like, illusions wouldn't really work for her. Like, I would assume that it would be like she's in the illusion world, but she can still, like, she would still be able to see people. Like, say you set up an environment, and instead of, like, you were, like, in this area, like, this kind of forest, but instead it looked like a beach or something. Maybe she would still see the beach, but, like, all the characters, she would see them standing there due to her abilities. Like, they would kind of, like, pierce through the illusion. I don't know. I'm very curious about that, because that is actually a really cool thing in total. Because I was thinking more of, like, okay, something like Naruto Shadow Clones, just from the concept of it. She would be able to counter. Obviously, the power levels are different, like, depending on which Naruto you're talking about. But from the concept and the kind of structure of how it works, something like that she'd be able to see through. But if she's able to eventually, like, illusions specifically, anything like that where there is, like, illusions or copies, those kind of abilities, if she's able to pretty much just nope through this, that's going to be a very, useful skill later on. It's just going to depend on what Nakaba wants to do with it. But she wants to obviously fight. She's going to be a fighter at some point, like in a much more true sense, because she can fight, but she's not a... Like, she doesn't have an offensive magic yet, and that's one of the things that you kind of need in the 7 Deadly Sins world to really actually be considered, like, a viable fighter. You can do stuff, but, like, look at Arthur before he got his magic. Not even talking about the Chaos stuff, but, like, Arc 1 Arthur, when he went up against, what was it against Gilthunder Hendrickson? I don't remember exactly. But he was able to fight, but it was just off swordsmanship, so he was powerful. But it was that lack of punch, of follow-up that like a magic can provide, that made it so like he was only able to do so much, because you are only able to do so much with pure sword skill. Like with Annie's case, she was able to get a victory because they separated her Burgi from her staff, and then she set up this Mirage ability. So that was something for her that, like, even though she had something after they disarmed her, it was, though, in a way that benefited Annie's character. It was in a way that Burgi, though, you know, most characters this would still have somewhat of effect on, but because of Annie's ability, she was able just to nope it. But seeing some of the attacks from the other guy, I gotta go back and see what this guy's name is. Obviously, it was mentioned. Doranok? I don't know, Dora the Explorer, whatever his name is. He goes and just does, like, a regular axe swing, and he, like, it's not impressive for 7 Deadly Sins, like, as a whole, but obviously, like, looking at the characters they're fighting, in terms of, like, their relative opponents, but also who he's fighting. He's fighting Donnie. He cleaves, like, a good chunk of, like, the ground next to him with that one swing. This would kill Donnie, obviously, on one hit. I mean, he even says that. Donnie doesn't have anything really offensive at the moment. One thing I do wonder about Donnie, that Donnie would, like, just speaking off of what Donnie showed now, if Donnie could master his afloat ability to just grab weapons, he would instantaneously become one of the better supports in the series. Because if, say, like, you were in a fight and he can just, like, see, like, okay, that's that person's weapon, because we know that weapons and magic tools and stuff within the 7 Deadly Sins verse are a big factor in the characters. Like, a lot of the characters are strong, but, like, pretty much all of the biggest feats we've seen, all the biggest displays of power in the verse are from characters who, though, are powerful, but they are using a weapon to amplify their magic, you know, as a conduit. Think of, like, the easiest one is, like, Meliodas early series, like, before, obviously, like, getting his powers back and stuff, but just, like, that part of bare hands, then he has his broken sword, versus getting a regular sword, or like when he had the twig, he cut that hill in half. And first one says mountain. It's not a mountain. You can see how big it is compared to like trees and the environment, Diane, and so. Not an argument I want to get into. It's just a long going one. But you see what he's capable of with a twig, and then he gets a sword back. And then afterwards, again, before he even gets his full power, well, it's not his full power, before he gets his power back that the druids had, he just switches from a plain sword to a magic sword. Obviously one suited for him, but one that is in the best way to benefit him. And there's a big gap between broken sword to twig to regular sword to magic sword. So say you had a character, again, who had again, like this guy who has his axe, I assume it's a magic axe. Donnie just does float, gets that out of his hands. The guy's still strong, but you would dramatically weaken them. And that would obviously like be a big factor, because you'd be hindering somebody's whole way of fighting. There's not a lot of characters in 7 Deadly Sins who fight without any form of magic tool of some kind, whether it's a weapon, armor, or whatever. I guess in Merlin's case, like an orb. But it, you know, something that they can use. And if you cripple somebody's fighting style, like at a fundamental level, that can really help you in a fight. This guy, though, his magic, and I think his magic's a good example of that, because his magic is called Impact. It's literally just, he pretty much does a magic shockwave. I mean, he does what pretty much every Dragon Ball character can do in the game. So, you know, that little energy field around him to push back a character who's too close, too much on you. I'm just remembering, like, Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Like, almost every character had that little blast sphere around them. But you have the one chick, Burgi, she's just doing stuff with her spells. And again, I actually, out of the opponents so far, out of, like, the opponents in the Dark Talismans, I'll say actually specifically, hers is definitely my favorite, because the whole 4-element staff is super basic. But this is a point in time, especially with the characters and levels they're at, this is where this is a threat. This is where a character literally just using the 4 basic elements in attacks that are dangerous, but nothing too crazy. Obviously, when we know like the ceiling of where characters get, but we see that this is where this is actually a danger, where it's literally just this lady's making like little water torrents and like flames and like little air sickles. Obviously, when we know that like once we get further down the line, not just like they have like, yeah, when we eventually get to stronger opponents, we know the stronger opponents exist. So we know that this is just a, like, we know the weight of this kind of opponent versus like the ones in the future that the cast will have to face. And I do like seeing that, though. I like seeing that these guys were not that, like, this chick, again, threatening, not too crazy though, but threatening for where we're at. But after that point, like, the dude ends up pretty much setting up, like, Donnie sets up this dude to use impact to rocket propel Annie right at Burgie, who just goes and like elbows her right in the gut and takes her staff from her. And that's when she goes to use her Mirage, and Annie's able to pretty much just nope that because she, you know, can see the truth and stuff, and just stabs this chick right in the chest. She doesn't stab her through the heart. She stabs her like what looks like above it. And obviously, like, it's gonna depend. It's like a rapier. It's like bent a little bit. Maybe she did stab her in the heart. I don't think so. I would assume. None of the main cast so far seems like they're fine with killing people yet. We'll see. I could see a scenario where it's like, yeah, these guys are literally just people who come to murder you. These aren't like, this isn't art, but we'll see. And on top of that, like, Ard is a good example of why Annie specifically might be fine with killing them, because they killed Ard. Maybe she sees these guys as obviously like just straight bad people. And I think when when good guys counter people who are outright just bad like this, I feel like that's a different thing. Like, these guys are just fine coming after and murdering these kids in the forest. And clearly they weren't very nice as they, you know, murdered Ard in cold blood. Well, I guess they weren't trying to, but they didn't seem to really care. But either way, fair chapter, good stuff. Likable, nothing too crazy. I will say, I am very intrigued at Donnie's chapter, because I want to see what he does. And I'm really hoping Donnie pulls out a new technique, so he doesn't have just float. Maybe he'll have something like a reverse float, where he makes just something heavy. Like, imagine he made the axe that the guy will. And then again, I'm just talking about just his weapon. But like, imagine he's like, oh, instead of making it float, he made it really heavy so this guy can't pick it up. And that's it. And that's like, then Donnie tries to set something up and is able to do some cool combo, you know, based off that ability. I don't know. I'm hoping something. I'd like to see something new from Donnie that is like an upgrade to his character and his ability. I don't want any other character kind of like have to save him in this one, because it's like they're all getting their own like little fight. So I'm hoping Donnie gets one as well. And his opponent does not have a very threatening magic. He's literally just a big meat wall. Like, his magic for the most part is, I have a defensive way to kind of like do a small little energy attack. That's it. Nothing too crazy. Anyway, other than that, comment below, thumbs up the video, a friend, like button, subscribe, and check out my other videos. But that, appreciate everybody's alright, subscribe. Thank you all for listening. Bye.